It is Friday, and we are working for Crusoe. Friday, July 19th, 2024 in Los Angeles. He is Sam Park. In Los Angeles, I am John Ramey. Rwandan's autocratic president wins re-election with 99% of the vote and 98% turnout. A big meeting in Big China. And an assassination attempt rocks the U.S. presidential election campaign. Sam Park, let's begin with the assassination attempt against Donald Trump, which took place in Butler, Pennsylvania last weekend. He was wounded in the ear. The would-be assassin was killed, but not before he fired 8 shots that wounded Trump and killed an audience member at a Trump rally. You and I spoke just personally about this. This is the highest profile assassination attempt of my lifetime, or of my memory, I should say. I was too young to remember the attempt on President Reagan. I don't remember 1968. I don't remember the attempts on Gerald Ford. And as much as you and I disagree with Donald Trump politically, and as much as we and many other people recognize he is a threat to the constitutional order and the rules-based international order, it is not a solution. Violence, assassinations, they don't work, and they're generally terrible. And we talk about it all the time in other countries on this podcast. And so it was quite sobering, really, to reflect on it happening here.
That's right. And in fact, those two elements that you just mentioned are not at all in tension. For instance, I agree with you. I believe that Donald Trump is a dire and perhaps existential threat to American democracy. And there are many reasons I believe that. But one of those reasons is because no other American in my lifetime has done more to normalize the idea of political violence, and especially political violence committed by ordinary citizens. And this is beyond dispute. He's done it over and over again before he was even the nominee of the Republican Party back in 2016. It's part of his thing. And so you don't get to always try to legitimize political violence and then complain about which direction it goes. But I think, frankly, since he survived the attempt, neither he nor any of his supporters actually care. The Republican convention that just finished last night, they seem to treat it as an election night victory party. They seem to believe that they've already won. And it would seem, anyway, that they believe the political violence helps them. And I think that they do believe that. Now, I can't prove that, but if Trump didn't believe that it helped him, that is short of taking his own life, why would he keep doing it? And in fact, before the assassination attempt, the greatest incident of political violence that we've seen in recent years was the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And these two incidents are very closely related. And this is why political violence is so awful, right? Is because it subverts democracy. It puts
explicitly.
Yes, it either puts one lone assassin or a mob in the position of overturning the democratic process. And this is why these things are to be condemned. And now, President Biden came out and said, there's no place in America for political violence. And I'm glad he said that. But it's important to remember that were it not for political violence, this country wouldn't exist. It was formed by an armed rebellion against the existing political order, which was the British monarchy. But that political violence was perpetrated for the purpose of establishing a representative democracy, not for the purpose of overturning one. And so there is a difference there. But at the same time, we're sort of put in this position of saying, well, there's no place for political violence in our society except at the beginning. Right. But we should remember that the people who started the American Revolution, they didn't just walk around with guns shooting people. right?
And encouraging folks to beat up protesters or
That's
loyalists
right.
or whatever.
They formed a committee. They issued a declaration. They organized themselves into something resembling an army. They sought foreign assistance, and on and on and on. This was an organized effort. It wasn't just walking around with a gasoline can, but throwing gasoline all over the place. And as much as I disdain the late Chairman Mao, he very memorably said, a revolution is not a dinner party. If you're going to do these things, you'd better have some pretty good ideas about what you want to achieve and how. This is nothing, right? This is not revolution. This is not any kind of thing that can be justified for any purpose.
The Republican Party had their nominating convention in Milwaukee immediately following the last weekend, during which the assassination attempt took place in Pennsylvania. So Donald Trump then received the nomination just yesterday officially in Milwaukee. Again, this is not a politics podcast. We're talking about Rwanda and China, but there was an economic element. I mean, there is always an economic element to the Trump MAGA movement. But at one point, and I did not watch the convention, but I have seen reports that there were chants of drill, baby, drill during Trump's acceptance speech. But certainly that has been heard at the convention.
And not for the first time, by the way.
No, this I think goes back to Sarah Palin, perhaps.
At least to 2012. That's the first time but perhaps they could go back to 2008.
Sure. This is not new rhetoric economically from the Republican Party of the United States. Right. And the fracking revolution of extracting oil from the Earth's surface, crust, has led to the United States being consistently throughout the entire Biden administration, and I believe the first Trump administration, the number one oil producing nation on Earth.
That's
the
correct.
United States produces 13 million barrels of oil a day. And this has happened throughout the last 4 years with Joe Biden in office. So this notion, and again, I understand that Biden and the Democrats can't talk about this because it's damaging to the environmentalist portion of their coalition. But it's just an economic falsehood that somehow the Republicans think the United States isn't producing enough oil, and that's why gas prices are high. Also, gas prices aren't high here compared to anywhere else on Earth. But go ahead.
And this is why I take issue with the idea that this is an economic element. It's not. It's strictly political.
Well, if it is an economic element, it's stupid. It's wrong.
Yes, that's right. But it's really just an identity element.
So it's just to irritate environmentalists. There's no intellectual argument that we're not drilling.
Exactly. And by the way, if Trump takes office, in the first place, I don't see I guess it's possible that petroleum extraction could increase. But if you're already producing more than any other country ever has in the history of time, then, it seems like you might already be running at full capacity. But
also, why would you want to glut the market?
Well, to bring the prices down, right? I mean, but the other factor here, though, is that I'm not sure that Biden's environmental agenda is as endangered as it might seem. For example, the state in America that it has the largest number of clean energy projects, both under construction and in the planning pipeline, is Texas.
Texas, yeah.
And that's largely because their permitting regime is more lax than any other state. So it's easy to get these things off the ground. And they're very careful in Texas not to use the word green.
Right.
They
use
the word
alternate?
Clean. Right. And so there's people in Texas who are probably voting for Trump and perhaps even contributing to his campaign right now, who are making money from this. And the price of especially solar energy is collapsing all over the world. And so I think that a number of these people, should Trump win, mind you, a number of them might go to him and say, look, we all supported you, and we're making money right now. Please don't make us have to stop doing it. And by the way, we're already producing tons of oil, and you can just take credit for that continuing. But there's no reason to take money out of our pockets just to stick your thumb in the eye of people, your thumb in the eye of people on the other side. Now, mind you, we understand that sticking your thumb in their eye is something you really enjoy doing, but you have to do it on our backs.
Just to point out, Russia is the second largest oil producer, and the United States produces 3 million more barrels per day than Russia. It's the U.S., Russia, and Saudi Arabia. We'll throw the graphic up here from Wikipedia. Sorry, we don't go too much into domestic politics, but there was an overlap with kind of, a historical shock and then an ostensibly economic talking point.
Well, not just that, but the nature of democracy is something that has global implications. And to the extent that the United States seeks to maintain its global leadership status, the health of our democracy is an issue that has some global implications, perhaps not as many as we might like to think, but definitely numerous implications and very important ones.
All right. So you sent me an interview with the International Monetary Fund's chief economist, Pierre-Olivier Gourinchas, and he talked about how there is a trend towards this realignment in global trade where the closed societies, and like, if you think about this, it makes sense, right? The autocrats have kind of their trading bloc. We're seeing that. And he points out it kind of got sped up by the invasion of Ukraine. But now you have this China, Russia, Iran, not just militarily, but economically, there's a little bit more. It's the free world and the autocratic world are kind of self-sorting into their own economic blocks. And it was sobering to hear the chief economist of the IMF say that. Like, it makes sense. And you think about military support and just the trends. I mean, Joe Biden has said it's the great struggle of the 21st century, right? Democracy versus authoritarianism. But the chief economist of the IMF says, yeah, that's actually happening on a global trade or an international trade sense.
Yes. I would say, though, that he was careful to mention that this is a developing trend.
He says a trend.
Right. It's not nowhere near the extent of the way the sort of Iron Curtain, that we might say, from the Cold War era, right, where there was virtually no trade at all beyond basic commodities with communist countries. China is still trading all over the world. Right. So they're not, I mean, to think of them as a closed economy, I think is sort of misplaced.
Closed politically, not closed economically.
That's right. And so, yes, they're trading quite a lot more with Russia than they did before. And they're spearheading that block of nations, but they haven't close themselves off from the world economy. I think the IMF is just concerned that this trend shouldn't continue far into the future, because that would have dire economic implications for everyone.
Dire economic, and also, I think history indicates that the less integrated, potentially adversarial countries are with one another economically, the higher the risk of war or conflict.
Yes. I think that's true. However, World War I broke out at a time of unprecedented global economic integration. Right. So, I mean, global economic integration is fine, but let's not hold it up as any sort of guarantor of world peace, because it really isn't. That's not what what history shows us.
So let's talk about China and their economy and the big meeting. So
the third plenum.
What is it? It's like all the egg brains get together and then they come out with like an economic recommendation list.
It's the Central Committee of the Communist Party.
Sure. This is a specifically economic meeting of the Central Committee, correct?
This one was, yes. Yeah. It's the third out of 7, by the way, right? There are 7 in every 5-year term of the Communist Party. And this one was billed in advance as focusing on economics, which is not the first time that's happened either.
Oh, no, 1978 was the famous third plenum with
Yes.
Deng that started the real miracle.
Exactly, right. And that's, I think, why a lot of people had their eye on this one, because China is such an important part of the world economy today, and their own economy is not doing very well right now. And that has a lot of implications for global investors, right, in terms of how they're going to allocate their capital. And so people, I think, were paying closer attention to this than they otherwise might have. And I think it's difficult to say. I think they might end up being disappointed. I've just now was reading the Global Times rundown of the plenum, and I'm sure our regular listeners will remember that the Global Times is the English language internet news website of the Chinese Communist Party. So it's
honestly, it's great. You've got me into it now.
Yeah. It's wildly entertaining. But the thing is, you have to sort of soak yourself in it to get how the rhetoric works, right? Because it's not
news, it's propaganda.
Yeah, and so those of us who are used to reading news sites, it just seems weird to begin with. But it was just this endless boilerplate. Boy, we're going to have a lot of reform, and it's going to be great, and we're
going to modernize.
Yeah, and it's boy, that Chairman Xi, he's doing a fantastic job, and it just goes on and on and on and on. One thing I would say though is that reading carefully, to go back to what we were just speaking about, is that one phrase that they used over and over again on this Global Times rundown was opening up. Right, we're committed to opening up, and not just inside of China and like boosting the private sector, right, helping them succeed, but also opening up to, or that is continuing the process of opening up to the world economy. So again, they're saying, oh no, we're not closed, right? We intend to keep trading with everybody, and that's an integral part of how we want to continue to grow our miraculous economy, which is another word that they used in this rundown.
Yes.
And so, in a way, but again, just as the "drill baby drill" slogan from the Republican convention was really just political, in a way, this is just trying to say, "Oh no, we're not closed. It's the West that's trying to put tariffs on us and stuff like this. We're the ones who are actually committed to open trade, right?" But the results of the third plenum, I think, won't be fully known for a little while. It's going to take a while to implement these policies. One thing I would say, though, that was absent from the Global Times summary of the plenum was anything about the Chinese consumer, right? And as we've discussed in previous episodes, many economists, especially Western ones, let's be frank about that, right, think that China should just basically give people money to go out and go shopping and buy stuff.
Stimulus.
And just an economic stimulus like we did during the pandemic. By the way, this helps keep people working. It helps eliminate deflation, which is something that China is still in danger of suffering from. And so I think its absence from the analysis of the third plenum was telling. It doesn't seem as though there's anything like this on offer. And to be fair, I think that if Chinese economic officials were going to be perfectly frank about this, they might say, listen, we've got 1 billion plus people, and for us to provide a meaningful amount of consumer stimulus, it would be so expensive, right? And by the way, we don't have the world's reserve currency. Sure, our interest rates are at all-time lows and might, in fact, go into negative territory. So we could borrow very cheaply, but still, it's a lot of money. And we're a little uneasy about that. Now, again, that's just my conjecture. I'm not saying that they actually think that, but I wouldn't blame them if they did.
All right. Please let me point out the irony that Western economists are suggesting the nominally communist government in China provide cash stimulus to their consumers. And there is a theory, your theory anyway, and I'm sure others, that actually might not be the best policy in the face of actual market realities. That seems deeply ironic to me.
It is pretty ironic. Yeah.
Now, let's just point out that there was an economic report that came out this week. China's economy, this is Reuters, China's economy grew slower than expected in the second quarter. Protracted property downturn, that's the fraught real estate market, and job insecurity knocked the wind out of a fragile recovery. Reuters says the world's second largest economy, China, grew 4.7% from April to June, slowest since the first quarter of 2023, missing a forecast of above 5%. It slowed from the previous quarter as well. Retail sales grinding to an 18-month low. Deflationary pressures forcing businesses to slash prices on everything from cars to food to clothes. So the economic headwinds not only continue, but are apparently worsening. And again, the smart people in the West, and I'm sure smart people in China, are saying maybe stimulus would help. Yes. But it's not there. It wasn't in the readout.
And people don't necessarily seem to know why this is, but it might just be because of Xi Jinping, right? He is a communist, right? And he, in many ways, even though he's nowhere near as old as Donald Trump or Joe Biden, he's pretty old school. In fact, he is on record as advising young people who are discontented with their economic lot in life that they should learn to eat bitterness. Now, of course,
that's pretty old school.
Yeah. And I think that young people in China, if they weren't afraid of, having their communications monitored, might perhaps reciprocate with some advice about what Chairman Xi should eat. But this is, in a way, it's sort of like a caricature of the old man going, "You kids today don't understand how easy you've got it. Back in my day, blah, 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 blah." Of course, back in his day, his father was purged in the Cultural Revolution and exiled to the rural hinterland. So
really?
He's got a point, yes.
Okay, wow, yeah.
Things actually are easier for young people in China today than they were for him when he was young. But that's, in many ways, the attitude that he seems to have. And I'm not saying that's the reason why there's no consumer stimulus, but it might be, right? I don't think we can discount it anyway.
So there's something in Xi's personality that's like, no stimulus. I had to walk uphill both ways in the snow to school. Right. Okay.
Absolutely.
Got it.
Eat bitterness?
Eat bitterness. That's Sam, you have pointed out over the years in our friendship that the communists, whether it's Mao saying a revolution is not a dinner party, or Marx saying the Germans would never be the first to have the revolution because it means you have to walk on the grass. Like
I think that was Stalin.
Actually. Oh, was it Stalin? Okay. Yeah. Well, it's the communists are always good for a pithy quote.
Yes. Well, but first of all, Mao is the best one just because he wrote them all down and published them in a book, right? A lot of the other ones,
all his zingers in one little red book.
That's right. A lot of the other ones, we're not actually certain whether anybody said these things, right?
Like the Stalin quote could be apocryphal.
Absolutely, right? But Mao, we know that he did, right? I've got the book back here on my shelf, thanks to my dad. But of course, communism was always an intellectual movement. That's how it started. Whereas capitalism just sort of happened over the ages, right? People just traded stuff, and that's how it came about. Communism started as an idea that somebody had, right? And so it should have a large body of quotable literature behind it, right? That's what it's all about.
Because it was intellectual initially.
In its origins, yes.
Yeah. Xi Jinping, a communist, also a raging anti-corruption guy, and he fired two people from the Communist Party. The Central Committee said in a communique, this is stemming from this plenum, right?
Yes.
Qin Gang's resignation confirmed the expulsion of Li Shangfu and former People's Liberation Army Rocket Force commander Li Yuchao, expelled from the Communist Party for serious violations of discipline and law, which are reported by Reuters to be euphemisms for corruption.
Yes. in the defense procurement area.
So does that mean these guys are spies or leaky or?
No, it's just that I think that a lot of this is an outgrowth of the war in Ukraine, right? Where the supposedly very modernized Russian military wasn't really, their hardware wasn't up to snuff, right? They're back to using World War II style shells, right? And so I think that Xi said, okay, I need to take a look at our guys and see what they're doing. And he didn't have to look very hard, right? There was a lot of fraud and cost inflation in Chinese defense procurement. And if Xi is sincere in his desire to want to retake Taiwan, he's got to put a stop to that, right? It's possible that this sort of thing might delay the plans for Taiwan. I have no way of knowing that. I'm just saying it is possible. But if people at that senior level are being fired for things
these guys
like
were
this,
in their 60s. Sorry.
Yeah, this is no joke, right? I mean,
would this be like somebody from like major brass in the
upper level guys at the Pentagon?
Security.
Absolutely. And the King Gong thing is a little different. Nobody seems to know exactly what his infraction was. They think that he might have fathered a child with an American, I think is the rumor. But yeah, he was the foreign minister.
So he resigned. The other two defense guys or national security guys were fired.
Exactly. And so, but again, this is a very senior level person. And it just goes to show that the anti-corruption campaign that's been a hallmark of Xi's leadership, it's ongoing. And part of it, we know, is simply a process of Xi removing his political adversaries. But quite a lot of it is because of actual corruption inside of China and people who are just skimming off the top.
Xi is fascinating. And again, because it's so opaque, right, we can only kind of piece together. I mean, you do see why like China watchers enjoy their work.
Sure.
Right. It's, and especially Xi, like the anti-corruption zeal, the zealotry, I would say, of Xi is unique in that position. I mean, I guess Mao had his own kind of zealotry, but
absolutely. I
don't know. She's almost like
a long time ago.
Yeah. She's almost like a Nixon-like figure somehow. Right.
Something like that. Yeah, sure. That makes it. But he's also, for instance, Nixon was nobody, right? He came from nothing.
He ate bitterness.
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas Xi Jinping is what's known as a princeling.
Okay.
Whereas, for instance, yes, his father was purged in the Cultural Revolution, but up until that point, he was one of the stalwart members of the original revolutionary generation.
He was prominent enough to be targeted for purging.
That's right. So Xi did not work himself up through the ranks, unlike some people inside the party today. And so he differs from Nixon in that very important respect.
Whereas, Nixon
he's more like a Bush in a way, right?
Gotcha.
In that sense. But yeah, in his attitude, yes, he's very Nixonian.
Yeah. Richard Nixon, of course, famously kicker from Orange County.
Yes.
I'll bleep that. Okay. Anything else on China? Oh, reading the Global Times, there's a story about some deputy made a comment about some deputy on the United States side made a comment about China's weaponization and militarization of space and commented that it was problematic. And of course, the Global Times fired back saying this is ridiculous and not true. And then they had a great cartoon. And of course, this story is I haven't even heard about it on the American side, media-wise, but it produced this cartoon, which I will put up now, that Sam has not yet seen, just about America being the militarizing influence in space. Just that. I think I'm going to have a Global Times Cartoon of the Week feature going forward.
Great. That would be fantastic.
Anything else on China, or can we move to Rwanda?
I think we ought to, yes.
Okay, so Rwanda, 14 million people, 76th most populous nation on earth, 129th biggest economy by nominal GDP, although their economy is growing quickly of late under President Paul Kagame. who this week smashed his own record by winning re-election with more than 99% of the vote. Full provisional results show. I do not believe we actually have the official results, but the provisional results at 99% seem to indicate Kagame will be in power. He took power in 2000, helping to end the Rwandan genocide. And
no, hang on a minute. He became president.
Excuse me. He
in
took
2000. Power. He took power at the end of the Rwanda genocide in 1994.
So, okay, gotcha. So 6 years in power, then became president in 2000. So he's already been so he's been in power for 30 years.
Yes.
And now he will be president for 30 years because he just won a 7-year term. The critics say Kagame's thundering majorities, this is the BBC, come as no surprise as he rules with an iron hand. I mean, he's an autocrat. Just look at the 2 candidates that were approved by the Electoral Commission to run against him. They garnered 53 1/100ths of a percentage point of the vote and 32 1/100ths of a percentage point of the vote. The 2 approved opposition candidates. This was neither free nor fair election.
That's right. And it was unfree and unfair in the way that the Iranian election was last week when we talked about that. And that is, I mean, these gentlemen were allowed to stand for election, right? Nobody stopped them, although the other people were stopped, right? But it's different from Iran in the sense that Kagame's political support, while perhaps not as high as the vote totals would suggest, is real. His population is very young. I believe a majority of the people in Rwanda have no memory of the genocide, but their parents do. And Kagame, he, as you say, is an autocrat. He runs a very sophisticated, repressive surveillance police state inside of his country. But he put an end to the genocide. And in a way, the international community has been giving him a free pass on everything else ever since, because it was highly embarrassing for them that the genocide occurred, and they could do nothing to stop it. It was Kagame who stopped it. And he's been basically trading on that ever since. For instance, his political party is still called the Rwandan Patriotic Front, which
it's a faction from the genocide.
That's not a terrible name for a political party, but that's also what it was called when it was just a rebel group. So the international community sort of lets him slide on things, but that's gotten out of hand. As you'll recall, the now defunct British government of Rishi Sunak put in place an immigration policy wherein people seeking asylum in Great Britain would be deported to Rwanda and have to process their asylum claims for Britain in Rwanda, regardless of what country they came from. They would just be flown to Rwanda. Now, this program never got off the ground. The new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, put an end to it almost immediately upon taking office last week. But the idea was that Rwanda was a safe third country that from which people could apply for asylum. And I guess, yeah, it's safe in the sense that any police state is safe. But this had just gotten to be ridiculous. The idea that you deport all these people to Rwanda was just outrageous. And the idea, and just Rishi Sunak doing it barefacedly, really was just kind of beyond the pale, I would say. But Kagame, he's likely to be in power for quite some time.
Just on the note of the international community letting Kagame slide on being an autocrat, if you go to his Wikipedia page, I mean, he's there with the Obamas, he's there with the Bidens, he's there with a lot of leaders. Like, yes, everybody's happy to take the pictures and smile. And if you think about it from the Rwandan, like the rank and file Rwandan voter or citizen, right? Yes, an autocratic police state, not great. Probably better than the genocide he managed to end.
Well, not just that, but it's a stable country, right? Again, in the sense that many police states are stable countries, right? But yeah, from the perspective of Rwandan, he's a national hero. And he's George Washington in a sense, although Washington had the sense to step aside after 2 terms. And so I don't see much way out of this. It's really unfortunate because Kagame is also arming and in some sense participating in the civil war, ongoing military conflict inside of the next door Democratic Republic of Congo, right? He's arming the M23 rebel group there. Some of his troops are almost certainly operating inside of the DRC also. And Kagame knows what he's talking about with this, right? Because he used to be a rebel leader hiding out across the border from Rwanda before he steamed in to stop the genocide. And so he's got experience with this sort of thing. But I think he would say, listen, the DRC is many times the size of my country. I need defensive strategic depth in order to forestall any possible attack that might come from them. From a military perspective, he's probably not wrong about that. But it's a shame that Congo is in such terrible shape and has been for a very long time, that such a policy seems to be the best on offer. Really just terrible.
Couple last notes on Kagame. He is presiding over one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. And also, despite his iron-fisted autocracy, he presents a very bookish aesthetic. Yes. He's very non-threatening. He's kind of almost nerdy looking.
Very, yes.
And so I think that's very kind of cunning that he kind of just looks kind of like the bookish leader.
He is, in many ways, a very fascinating figure in the way that lots of autocrats are. Although, he, as you say, his is a very distinctive posture, even amongst that set of people.
That will do it for this week's edition of Working for Crusoe. Friendly reminder, political violence is not helpful. Voting is. What are we looking at for next week?
Oh, there could be any number of things. There's still no government in France. Hopefully there will be soon. We'll want to keep an eye on that. If you want to know what political violence looks like, look at Kenya, where it's still ongoing, and it's a terrible mess. So we might want to return to that.
Okay. He's Sam Park. I'm John Ramey. This has been Working for Crusoe. Have yourselves a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.